It is my incredible pleasure to introduce to you the U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. I want to tell you a little bit about Arne, and then Arne, before you come up, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the folks who are here in the room. Arne Duncan was nominated to be Secretary of Education by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the Senate early in 2009. Arne is an advocate for education. He believes that it's the most pressing issue in America, and it's the civil rights issue of our generation. It's one of the few paths out of poverty that provide a clear line in that regard. Prior to becoming U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Chicago Public Schools from 2001 to 2008. In that role, he opened over 100 new schools. He expanded after-school and summer learning time. He closed down underperforming schools, and he increased early childhood and college access. Arne, as some of you know, was a professional basketball player, played for about 4 or 5 years in Australia. He's also no stranger to the greater Boston area. He attended Harvard University, graduated in 1987, magna cum laude, where he was co-captain of Harvard's basketball team. Arne credits some of his interest in education to the afternoons he spent in his mother's tutoring program, where he worked with children from the Chicago schools. He's married to Karen Duncan. They have 2 children. And before I bring the Secretary up, and maybe why don't you come up, Mr. Secretary, and then what I'd like to know, first of all, how many of you folks here are teachers? Union presidents, teachers from the teacher ranks. That's great. How many of you are superintendents? Excellent. How many are school committee members? Great to have you with us here. How many are building principals or district administrators? Outstanding. Well, I hope that you find today productive. I want to call out, and so my point in calling these folks out, Mr. Secretary, is you have in front of you the best and the brightest of the teaching force and the administrative force in the United States. Tribute to all of you. So. As much as it's my pleasure to introduce the Secretary, it's my pleasure to introduce you. I want to call out Maura Banta in the front row, Chair of the State Board of Education. I want to call out Alice Peisch, Co-Chair of the Legislature's Education Committee. Tom Scott, who heads MASS, the Superintendents Association. Paul Toner, head of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. Se-Yun Lee from the Executive Office of Education. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Massachusetts.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Mitchell, for your great leadership. I'll be pretty quick, so think about all your tough questions, and I'm happy to take them in a moment. Mitchell said that Massachusetts is the best state in terms of education in the country, and that is true by every single measure. And you guys should be amazingly proud of what you've done. And as I travel the country, I think people get tired of me talking about Massachusetts. So, but you guys are doing so much right. And I think the investments we've made, whether it was the first Race to the Top or the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge more recently, you guys keep taking all of our money. And I always say it's not a gift, it's an investment. And I just have tremendous confidence in the leadership of this state in helping lead the country where we need to go. And what I admire so much is, again, by every single, relative to other states, relative to things internationally, by virtually every single measure, you guys are leading the country. And while it's great to celebrate that and recognize it, what I never sense here is any complacency or any sense of self-satisfaction or we've arrived at the mountaintop. There's a hunger here, there's a sense of urgency, there's a commitment to continue to improve that I find just remarkable. And so I appreciate the collective commitment. I appreciate the difference you're making in students' lives. And we want to be a good partner. We want to help you get there. And for me, it's not just about what you're doing for the children in this state or in your districts. It's about trying to demonstrate to the country what's possible when really committed adults come together to try and transform the life chances of children. For all the success here, we know there's still huge challenges. We know our achievement gaps here and across the country are still far too large. There are about 82,000 ninth graders in this state, 82,000. There are about 68,000 12th graders. So during those high school years, this state loses about 14,000 young people. And we know most of them are dropping out. Most of them are losing from our schools to our streets. And there aren't any good jobs out there for them anymore. In our Black and Latino populations, that's often 30, 40, 50%. And that, to me, is just morally unacceptable and economically unsustainable. So a lot of hard work ahead of us. We've got a whole day laid out, and just appreciate the tremendous commitment. This is tough, tough work. And I don't want to, sort of sugarcoat that. We're going to ask you to do some really hard things together going forward, things that we think will elevate the profession and strengthen the profession. But working through teacher evaluation, working through principal evaluation, working through all these tough issues is not easy. And there's a reason that around the country for a long, long time, these systems haven't worked too well. And to me, it's never about playing gotcha or trying to fire your way to the top. That's not how you do it. I think it's about how do you attract and retain great talent and give them a career ladder to be successful. And how do we better get our hardest working teachers and principals to the children and communities who need the most help? And can we do that at scale? So this is going to be tough. It's going to challenge everybody to move outside your comfort zones. By definition, nobody will get everything you want out of this. But I'm a big believer when I talk about what we call tough-minded collaboration. It's not sort of just soft collaboration. It's not singing Kumbaya. It's really in a tough way coming together to say our children, our communities, our districts, our state deserve something better. And we're going to move outside our comfort zones. We're going to do some really tough things that stretch us in ways that make us a little bit, may make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And I'm just very, very hopeful about what you can do collectively to get this work done here. And again, the better the work here, the better the collaboration, the better the outcome. I think the implications for the country are huge. So I thank you so much for what you have done. We're very, very hopeful about what you will do, and whatever we can do, one, to be a good partner, and secondly, to get out of your way when you're doing good work, let us know. Final, just quick thought, we know Massachusetts has submitted a great application around the waiver for No Child Left Behind. Stay tuned on that. I'll take any questions you want. But you guys, as always, are doing a great, great job. I'll stop there and take any questions folks might have. Thank you. Please don't be shy. Carol, make me stand up.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate your coming to Boston. I think that we appreciate the support for Race to the Top, the focus on early childhood, and then the renewed look at achievement gaps. And I guess given the work that we have to do around Common Core standards, new teacher evaluation instruments, how do you see the administration focusing on the persistent gaps, particularly for, I would say, Black and Latino males in the nation?
So for all the success we've had as a country, this is one where we are letting down huge segments of our population. And I think it's a stain upon our country. I think these communities will continue to be destined to remain in poverty, and to struggle unless we have young men and young men of color not just stay in school, but graduate and graduate college and career ready. So there aren't easy answers out there. It takes a lot of hard work. For me, I always look at a cradle all the way through. So for me, it starts with great early childhood education, and where we can increase access, we can make sure that access is very high quality and put it into disadvantaged communities. I think if our babies can start kindergarten ready to read and with their literacy skills intact and socialization skills intact, that goes a long way towards closing these achievement gaps. I think we've lacked tremendous creativity. We've lacked any sense of urgency around having a more diverse teacher workforce. I'm desperately trying to get more men and more men of color to come into the profession. When I ran the Chicago public schools, many of my elementary schools when we started had no men of color in them, and my schools were 90% Black and Latino. And our young boys of color need role models. They need mentors. And I want great talent. I just want that talent to reflect the diversity of our young people. I'm a big believer in extracurriculars, dance and drama and art and music and sports teams. And you worry when budgets get tough, often those things get cut, and those are often the things that keep students excited about coming to school. I always try to be very candid. I didn't necessarily love biology and algebra, but I wanted to play on the basketball team, and to do that, I had to do well academically, and I think that's true for so many of our young boys. I think we've had sort of these low expectations. I think Massachusetts has done better than most, but where classes are really rigorous and engaging and where young people are challenged, a lot of young people leave school not because it's too hard, but because they're bored. And where we're engaging them and where it's a challenging curriculum, I think they do better. So not one easy answer. We want to put a lot out there to try and help. Then obviously the work we're trying to do to replicate Jeffrey Canada's Harlem Children's Zone, the Promised Neighborhood Initiative, is trying to look not just at what's going on in schools, but entire communities and what's the support structure we can put in place there. But we are desperately looking for places that are taking this on in really courageous ways. Schools, nonprofits, churches, social service agencies, everybody working together, parents. And where we're seeing good work, we want to put a lot more resources behind that and try and see if we can fundamentally break through in this area. Yeah, I'll trade.
Thank you for being here as well. I was going to try and use my classroom voice, but would you talk to us a little bit about ESEA reauthorization and the difference between the House and Senate and the administration, and are we going to get there?
So you guys read the paper and watch TV like I do, and unfortunately Congress is pretty dysfunctional right now. And it's, I can't tell you how disheartening it is to me when the country's struggling. We all sort of need to work together. So as we talk to you guys about tough-minded collaboration, please don't look at Washington. It is the exact antithesis of everything I want you guys doing. And so that's just reality. And I desperately hoped Congress would reauthorize and fix No Child Left Behind and do it together. I think No Child Left Behind is fundamentally broken in lots of ways. It is far too punitive, very, very prescriptive, top-down from Washington. I always tell a story that when I ran the Chicago Public Schools, I almost had to sue our Department of Education for the right to tutor about 25,000 of my kids after school. It was the most craziest battle. We won it, but I never understood why I had to almost sue the federal government to tutor a lot of kids after school who wanted to work hard. It led to a dumbing down of standards in many states, not here necessarily Massachusetts, but in many other states. It led to a narrowing of the curriculum. So great focus on math and science, math and reading, but science and social studies and the arts and PE and everything got thrown to the sidelines. So we think the law is impeding progress. We think there are far too many perverse incentives and disincentives there. And we thought there could be a common sense, bipartisan way to fix it. That hasn't happened. The Senate put together a decent bill. We weren't thrilled with it. The House put together, we thought, a very poor bill that sort of abdicates responsibility and block grants Title I and IDA so money could move from poor children to wealthy children and money could move away from children with special needs. Not something we can ever support. It was done in a simply partisan way, which doesn't make sense either. So the long answer is that we moved forward with a waiver package, and we wanted to partner directly with states and not wait. And we're getting close to making the decisions on the first round of waiver applications, and obviously Massachusetts has worked really hard there. I don't know if Congress will come together, tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. Right now, I'm not too optimistic, quite frankly, that they'll do anything. But we feel really good about our ability to partner directly with states. So we had 11 states apply in the first round of waivers. We're going to announce those first states relatively soon. We have between 30 and 40 states going to come back in the second round. And I think the amount of innovation coming from the states is just a great lesson from Washington to learn from. And when and if Congress gets its act together and reauthorize, there are going to be some fantastic models to look at from around the country, and hopefully it'll inform that conversation. So that's where we're at. I'm very pleased we have the ability to provide waivers and provide flexibility. That was not my first choice. My first choice was that Congress would have fixed this together for the country. That's not reality, so we had to play the cards we were dealt. Anything else? Yes, sir. Oh, wait 1 second.
How do we increase parental involvement in our schools, particularly at the elementary level?
These are all great questions. I don't have easy answers. That is a huge challenge. And a couple thoughts on that. First of all, I think it's always easy to sort of blame parents and talk about things that they're not doing. And I always try and be very self-critical and look in the mirror and figure out what can we do as educators to change things. So I'll tell you what I tried to do when I led the Chicago Public Schools. I tried to make our schools community centers that were open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a whole host of after-school programs for children and for their parents, GED, ESL, family literacy nights, potluck dinners. I really thought many of our children, particularly in poor communities, they had really struggled in school, had largely had failure experiences, and it might seem easy for them to walk in the door. That was a real stretch for them. And quite frankly, many of our schools did not make parents feel wanted or needed or sort of part of the solution. So we tried to change that culture. We had teachers and principals going out literally on knocking on doors and doing home visits and things like that, trying to bridge that gap. And we ended up having a set of schools that had, on some days, more than 100 parents coming every single day, not for their children's education, but for their own. So it's a little bit of a Field of Dreams plan that if you build it, they will come. Food's really important. You got to feed people. And again, potluck dinners, pizza nights, whatever it might be. It's one area where I think our department has been part of the problem. I think we have very much underinvested in parental education. In our next budget, we're trying to go from about $135 million for parent activities to about $280. I'm looking to double funding in a really tough budget time. And what we want to do is simply take to scale what's working in local communities. So I don't think the best programs are ever going to come from me or from Washington, but where we see parental engagement leading to better student achievement, we want to do a lot more of that. And for me, it's not sort of about feel-good activities. It's not about bake sales or whatever. So what are you really doing to engage parents in meaningful ways to get them to the next level? I'm actually leaving here to go visit the parent university you have here, where parents are taking classes and doing some things. We did some of that in Chicago. That's very interesting to me. But I do believe we have to challenge parents, but we also have to really look in the mirror and figure out what are the barriers, real or perceived, that parents are feeling that make them reluctant to become more engaged in school. The final thing I'll say is you asked about elementary. When we surveyed students, we surveyed high school students in Chicago, one of the things that hit me hard, is actually really sad, it's sort of heartbreaking. One of the biggest things our teenagers were asking for was that for their parents to be more engaged in their lives. So we tend to think of teenagers as wanting more freedom and wanting a lot more autonomy. They were desperately asking for their parents to do more with them. So we try to think of things like bowling nights and other things where teenagers and their parents could connect in the school community. So it's not just a pre-K and primary and elementary challenge. I really think that parental engagement at the high school level is another tough nut that we have to crack.
Hi, Secretary Duncan. Adam Gray. We met the other day.
All time no see. Yeah.
We know that 50% of teachers in urban schools leave between years 3 and 5. And I'm just curious to hear what you think about how the teacher evaluation process will help retain a higher percentage of teachers.
So that to me is the travesty in education. Is not, when a teacher simply isn't making it after support, yes, we need to do a better job removing that teacher, but to me that's a tiny percent of the battle. The bigger battle of how many extraordinarily talented young people come into education, want to make a difference, are working hard, and we burn them out. We don't support them, and we lose that talent. So I think not just meaningful evaluation, but real career ladders, ways to make a lot more money over time. Some folks leave when they want to buy a house or start a family and simply can't afford to work in education. No one goes into education to get rich, but you shouldn't have to take a vow of poverty to do it either. So real meaningful feedback where teachers who are doing a great job get the rewards and the recognition, teachers who need more support are getting that, having master and mentor teachers who can help out. I've been very outspoken. I think we should pay starting teachers a lot more money. I've talked about doubling starting salaries. I've talked about a great teacher making $130,000, $140,000, $150,000. There have to be some trade-offs for these things. But I think the value proposition that we offer teachers today simply isn't good enough to attract and retain great talent. And I look at high-performing countries around the globe, and they all do some things fundamentally different than us. In those countries, it's doctors, lawyers, engineers, and teachers, all at the same level. South Korea, I always talk about teachers there being known as nation builders. Our teachers are nation builders, but we don't treat them as such. And in those countries, it's the top third, the top 20%. In Finland, it's the top 10% of college grads are going into education. 90% don't have that opportunity. And I think we have to do a lot more to attract the hardest working and most committed young people. So great teacher evaluation that provides the support, that provides the structure, that provides a real career ladder, I think is a huge step in the right direction. But we have to look at this entire pipeline, which right now I think is broken. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I have sort of a two-pronged piece. And one is we all acknowledge that Massachusetts is doing a lot of wonderful things. I certainly hear from a lot of our superintendents that we seem to be doing an awful lot of many things. We seem to be overwhelmed by just the number of things that are coming at us today. And not that any one of those is a bad thing, but at the same time, with our economy the way it is, we struggle with having the kind of capacity and resources. Our budgets, generally speaking, when we make reductions, administrators are one of those positions that are cut because that's what the general citizenry see is one of the places to cut. And we understand. We want to preserve the classroom as best we can. So I guess two things. As we look at over the next several years of Race to the Top and the resources we have to do many of the things that we're now engaged in, where do you see the resources and the support and where do you see as the really major priorities? Because I think for a lot of us, the feeling is that we really ought to focus on fewer things rather than too many things and really do something right. And so I think that the evaluation piece is certainly one we agree with, but I think it would be helpful to hear your perspective on what should our priorities be?
Yeah, great question. So on the resource side, this is obviously a horrendous time financially. And many educators who have been doing this work for 20, 30, 40 years say this is the toughest time they've ever faced. And it is what it is. There's no upside there. There's no huge benefit. All we can try and do is to lead by example. Obviously with the Recovery Act, almost $100 billion to save educator jobs. It would have been much, much, much worse around the country if we hadn't been able to do that. At a time when the president is flatlining the rest of domestic spending, he's asking for a $4 billion increase in our budget. So we're trying to walk the walk and not just sort of talk about it. Obviously, our funding is usually 8, 9, 10% of a budget. Usually about half is from the state, about 40% is local. So we are the minority investor. But I just fundamentally think education's an investment, not an expense. And we need our country to understand that. We need more people, again, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't care. We need more people going to the voting booth saying, what is this political leader going to do for education? And I think so many politicians talk about education, very few actually really walk that walk and believe it. I think you have a great, great governor here who's very courageous, but that's not always the case, quite frankly. So at every level, I think elected officials need to be held accountable for investing, not in the status quo, but in a vision of reform. And when we fail to invest, I promise you, China is not scaling back on education funding. India is not scaling back. South Korea is not scaling back. And our children are as smart, as talented, as committed, as entrepreneurial children anywhere in the world. But that's who they're competing with. And if we don't invest, I worry a lot about what's going to happen to our country, ultimately what's going to happen to our children. So we have some fundamental decisions to make here. Lastly, I'll say that I met with a governor who was just really thoughtful. He said, Arne, I followed all these guys. He said, every governor says they're an education governor, and almost none of them do that. He said, what can I do differently? Like, he was really challenging himself to think about this. And so I think all of us, local, state, national, have to be held accountable and need to be challenged to support this. Your fundamental point about doing a couple things world class and not doing a million things in a mediocre way, I think it makes tremendous sense. And I always think we in education, we're great at starting new programs. We're terrible at stopping things. So we just layer on more and more. And we never, in tough economic times, say this program feels good, seems good, but we're not getting results, so we need to stop. The couple things that are really important to me going forward is this move towards the Common Core. And again, you guys are so much further along than most states. That's much less of a jump. Frankly, you're as close, if not closer, than anyone else in the country. But a lot of places, this is a massive leap. It's the right leap, but it's going to be a big, big change. Tennessee went on their old proficiency from about 91% of students being proficient to about 34% when they raised standards. And that was brutal, but it was the truth. And achievement gaps, which are already large there, achievement gaps actually doubled. So it's like you're starting to tell the real honest truth there. So that's a big jump some places. I think this teacher evaluation, principal evaluation support is a huge one. I think that's been broken again for 30, 40, 50 years. I think Paul and others are providing tremendous courage and leadership there. But again, recognizing great talent, helping other folks succeed, not tolerating failure, it makes sense, but it's just not what we have done historically. And everyone has to move. Management has to move. Boards have to move. Union has to move. Again, I think you guys have a chance to really break through there. And then I would go back, not to give you too many, that's for sure. I think this early childhood piece is desperately important. If we can level the playing field and close gaps before children enter kindergarten, we have to stop playing catch up. And then finally, the idea we talked about, so these wraparound services. We need great teachers, we need great principals, but healthcare clinics and GED and family engagement, the more our schools start to be open, not 6 hours a day, but 12 hours a day, 13 hours a day, and bring in nonprofit partners, bring in the Boys and Girls Clubs, bring in the community colleges, I think if you start to put that mix of things together, that to me is the core of what will change students' lives.
Secretary Duncan, I'm Ross Wilson from Boston Public Schools. I want to follow up on Adam Gray's question about supporting effective teaching. It's such a high leverage strategy we have in place right now. And so I want your advice or you're thinking about best practices from around the country around teacher preparation courses, around university partners, and advice about union partnerships. How to get this done and support teaching.
Well, I think the Boston residency program here is a fantastic model, and again, you guys are way out ahead. But I just try and look at the facts. So the facts today are that 62% of young teachers feel they're unprepared to go into the classroom. 62%. So I always say if 62% of our doctors weren't prepared to practice medicine, we'd have a revolution in this country. But the fact that as teachers, no one sort of cares, and we keep perpetuating that. So most schools of education, not all, most schools of education don't provide the hands-on classroom management experience that young people need. Lots of theory and history and philosophy and everything else about education, not enough actual hands-on education. Lots of young teachers tell me all the new data that they have available and technology to help understand not what they're teaching, but what are their students learning and formative assessments. Very, very helpful, but their professors have been out of the classroom for 10, 15, 20 years, so they're learning on the job, and they're wondering why I have to learn it once I'm practicing. So those are two big things breaking through. But again, the residency stuff that you guys are doing, the medical model, is very, very interesting to me. And if we had teachers at a whole different level coming in, I think that would be a breakthrough. The other thing, finally, is, again, just attracting top talent. And the fact of the matter is the majority of our teachers come from the bottom third of their classes. In other countries, it's always the top 30%, top 20%, or top 10%. So can we go from majority bottom third to majority top third and elevate the profession in a very different way? So much more rigorous training, much more selectivity about who comes in, and then much better support, particularly in those very tough early years. None of this stuff is easy, but it's also not rocket science. And again, we don't have to sort of make it up here. There are other countries that have systemically done this over a number of years. I think we can learn both from their successes and failures and leapfrog past them. And then the final part, I think the union partnership is just desperately, desperately important. And I know you guys are struggling with that here in Boston, and I don't have any easy answers there. I think as Boston goes, so goes the state, and so goes the country, so the stakes are really high. Again, I don't say this lightly. I think Paul Toner is providing great, great leadership and courage and is moving the union in some difficult ways. But if it's just the union, it's not going to work either. It's got to be management. It's got to be boards, all of us sort of putting down our arms. The final thing I'll say, it's so interesting, these conversations. I get to travel the country, and in place after place after place, you can just sort of close your eyes and just hear the same conversation. The union has the same role. The management has the same role. Board. It just doesn't matter time or place. And I keep looking for the places that are going to sort of put away the traditional talking points and the traditional viewpoints and do some things very differently. I think that's what it's going to take. There are a number of places, and again, this is hard. There are a number of places struggling with this, starting to make some movement. Delaware's making some movement. But this is uncharted territory for everyone. And it takes a leap of faith. It takes trusting someone you haven't historically trusted. It takes two people jumping together hand in hand. If that doesn't happen, you're not going to get there. So I know we're asking a lot. But if we don't do that, we're just going to perpetuate the dysfunction of decades. And I think we have to ask folks to move in a very different direction. One more question? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I'm Shauna Verone with Boston Collegiate Charter School. It's clear from what you've said and the questions that have been asked today that we have a lot of work to get done. And I'm wondering if you could comment on the role that charter schools could play in that work, and in particular, how we can move from the divisive rhetoric to a common vision where we're all working together to get that hard work done. Well,
I think that's the other. I always talk about the wrong education fights. And for me, the wrong education fight, we fight all the wrong battles, and we waste time and energy. And I think one of the biggest nonsensical battles in my mind is charter versus traditional. And I always say good charter schools are part of the solution, bad charter schools are part of the problem, good traditional schools are part of the solution, bad traditional are part of the problem. And you find any 6-year-old or 7-year-old, they don't know if they go to a charter school or a gifted school, a neighborhood school, an IB, does my teacher care about me? Am I learning? Am I safe? Does the principal know who I am? What's going on there? We just need a lot more schools that look like that. You are starting to see some districts and some charter groups collaborating in ways that haven't happened historically. That is huge. Charters should be learning from districts. Districts should be learning from charters. We should be replicating best practices. It sounds so common sense, but we've been so busy fighting, and we just need more quality. So great charters, I think, can really help the conversation. I've challenged the charter community when we have non-performing charters. We should close them down and be very tough-minded about that. And it's amazing to me, people say, well, charters are sort of in the middle. I think charters overall are in the middle. I think the best ones are a huge part of the solution. I think the bad ones are a huge part of the problem. There's some, in the middle. And so where you have very high-performing, successful charter schools, we need to learn from that, replicate that. I was at a great charter in Florida 2 weeks ago that had a waiting list of 11,000. 11,000 on the waiting list. Something's right there. We had to listen to parents and provide those kinds of opportunities. Where you have charters that have 60% dropout rates, well, we need to close them down. They're not helping us. So I think that dialogue, again, whether it's union management or traditional schools and districts and charter, all the wrong fights, not helping us close achievement gaps, not helping us level the playing field, not helping us make sure every single child is graduating college and career ready. I just think, again, those 14,000 young people every single year who this state is losing from our schools to our streets, what are we doing collectively to get that down to zero? What possible chance do those young people have in today's economy to get a good job as a high school dropout? It's just nothing. There's nothing out there for them. So that, to me, that's the right fight. Let's fight about how we get those kids back in school. Let's fight about how we get them college and career ready. And all the other drama we just got to put to the side. I think I'm out of time. Thank you so much for your leadership. Thanks for the hard work. And we're looking for great things from you.
That was great. That was great. If I might just offer an observation, I'm near the end of my 4th decade in this business, and I have not encountered anyone in that time who has really cleared the way and created that kind of focus on what does it take to do right by our children, by our students. Secretary Duncan's very fond of praising us, whether it's at state leadership, district leadership, the teaching ranks, for our courage, but I have not met anybody in my 4 decades who has really shown the way and demonstrated that courage and really asked us to step up our game on behalf of the children. Thank you very much for being here.